The Rings of Power is still bad fantasy, and it continues to prove that Amazon doesn't understand this genre. The series is now suffering the consequences of its poor choices in that first season, as they try and dig themselves out of this hole they've made for themselves.
You maniac! You blew it up! Damn you all to hell!
In the last video, we talked about how the Rings of Power, it threw away Tolkien's story in favor of Amazon's own original world building. World building is the bedrock of the genre. It is foundational, and it has to be strong from the beginning. It cannot be reverse engineered. This season, the chickens are coming home to roost, and it's showing just how much last season broke Tolkien's largest story. The showrunners are trying to get back to that real core story, but it has been completely mangled, kind of like a square peg being gently eased into a round hole with a framing hammer. I'll give credit where it's due. There's at least recognizable elements in this season, stuff that was actually canon, such as the Siege of Eregion, or, Annatar helping to forge the rings. But in order for these canon elements to work, the show has to bend itself over backwards by making every character a moron, just so the narrative can function in any way. In trying to fix the problems, they're creating just entirely new ones. Again, I really don't want to get bogged down in the differences from the source, so here's just a quick reminder of how the main canon events, they're breadcrumbs compared to, the BS main meal. In the books, Celebrimbor forges the Elvish rings last, not first, because this would break the whole story, and oh boy does this season prove it. Sauron does not pretend to be Annatar after the rings are forged. He shows up first and convinces the elves to make the rings. He does not try to make rings for the dwarves and men. All the rings were made for the elves, and he only gifted them to other races later on. Elrond did not have some weird love affair with his mother-in-law, and wasn't scared of the rings. There were no Burrow Wights yet. A dark elf never invaded Eregion. Sauron invaded Eregion after his schemes were discovered and after the One Ring was forged. Ar-Pharazôn didn't really cause the corruption and fall of Numenor until after Sauron was taken prisoner. The hobbits and the wizards didn't show up until the Third Age, so everything with them is still made up. There was no Dark Wizard, unless you count Saruman, but he didn't turn evil until close to the events of Lord of the Rings. Again, the Balrog was not awoken in the Second Age, he awoke in the Third. The Rings of Power didn't just make people evil all on their own, because that again would break the entire story. More on that later. And as we discussed last video, not following the original story doesn't actually make something necessarily bad. Look at Jurassic Park, for example. Very different from the book. But the real question here is, does that bad foundation from season 1 just sink the rest of this series? For me, the answer's kinda probably, but let me start from the top to explain why. The show starts with a flashback of our favorite Dark Lord, who is giving his best impression of Lord Farquaad.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
Adar doesn't really like hearing this so much, so kills him with his crown. Why does this crown have the power to maim or kill Sauron? Don't worry about that. It just does. You see, the One Ring in the original story, it had clear reasons for why it was both a weakness and a strength for Sauron. In an attempt to enslave the other rings, Sauron poured all his strength and cruelty into the one. It was part of him. If it was destroyed, he was destroyed. It was also a metaphor for how the pursuit of power can lead to one's own downfall. This helmet, it's just a convenient MacGuffin, manifested out of nothing so characters can chase after it for the next season or two. Unfortunately for everyone, Sauron survives to become Black Goop, where he sleds down a hill and eats an old lady. This allows him to return as sexy Halbrand, who coincidentally bumps into an old man carrying a royal crest that allows him to be confused as a prince. Now that is convenient. And after that, he's attacked by a fish, and by pure just happenstance, he bumps into Galadriel in the middle of the ocean. This kickstarts the events of the first season. I talked a lot in the last video about the ridiculous coincidences and how the entire story often hinged on just these 1 in a billion chances. And that is bad, but you ain't seen nothing yet. With that, we return back to modern day. Modern, For them, Sauron, for some ungodly reason, has decided to go to Mordor and let himself be captured by Adar. He tells Adar, like Moses,
"Let my people go."
And Adar says, no. This allows Halbrand to convince Adar that Sauron is back, and he has taken on a new form. Naturally, Adar asks, okay, what form? To which Halbrand says, no idea. So hold up a minute. How then do you know that he's back and that he's taken on a new form? Adar does not think to ask this obvious question, while conveniently also forgetting that Halbrand, a man he's never met, once asked him on a battlefield, Remember me? Nothing to see here. Seems all good. Adar instead takes an oath from Halbrand that he will definitely serve him and definitely not betray him. And right off the bat, we have people acting like they don't have two brain cells to rub together. Adar has been given no reason to trust this enemy, and does so based on the flimsiest oath. He doesn't know Halbrand. He doesn't know if he's the sort of guy to keep an oath. It's not like it's magically binding or anything. Meanwhile, Sauron is literally laughing at his stupidity as he's kissing his boots. The real reason for this scene is the writers needed Adar to invade Eregion later, but didn't have a strong enough motivation to get him there. So they had Sauron just show up and say, hey, maybe Sauron's in Eregion. And just like Galadriel last season, Adar chooses to march his entire army to attack a city based on no evidence from an untrustworthy source. Even if Halbrand had been telling the truth, Sauron's a shapeshifter. I mean, he could just disguise himself as an orc during a battle and just waltz right on out of there. I guess he didn't think of that either, though. Or what if Adar hadn't released Sauron and just said, hey, I'm going to keep you in captivity and I'll just attack the city and see if you're right? That wouldn't exactly help Sauron's plan to make a bunch of evil rings to control the world. This season is taking a step in the right direction in that it's trying to make Sauron actually an active antagonist again. And that was one of my biggest complaints last season. However, his plan is completely reliant on everyone being complete morons, or acting in ways that he could not possibly ever predict. Anyway, Sauron is set free and he heads for Eregion, where no one bothered to tell Celebrimbor that he is Sauron. What luck. As I said last video, how dumb do both Galadriel and Elrond have to be not to tell the one person who needs to know? Galadriel, she knew for sure, and Elrond, he heavily suspected it. And then Sauron, he arrives just assuming Celebrimbor wasn't informed, which is a fairly asinine assumption. Now, I'll give Galadriel some credit here. She at least told Celebrimbor not to treat with Halbrand, but she has no authority over him, and she never gives him a real reason, why he shouldn't. As a result, Sauron easily tricks Celebrimbor into trusting him by basically saying, nah, Galadriel didn't mean it. And the idiot buys it hook, line, and sinker. Even worse, Halbrand then decides to reveal himself as a shapeshifter. Yeah, because those have a reputation for being trustworthy. He even does this in this spooky lightning storm with hellfire just blazing out of the fireplace. Yeah, nothing ominous about that. That seems all good. He then calls himself Anatar and says he has been sent by the Valar to give gifts of the rings to the other races. Okay, why do the other races need the rings? I mean, the elves needed the rings last season because their power was fading and they needed to heal their tree so they didn't become mortal or leave Middle-earth. What use do the other races have for them? How does it help them in any way? But Celebrimbor, he too doesn't think to ask any of these questions. As I said, and this will come up a lot in this video, the elvish rings being forged first cause endless problems. It makes no sense for Celebrimbor to accept Anatar's help when he already knows how to make the rings. In the book, Sauron convinces Celebrimbor to make the rings, and then works with him, both teaching him and kind of learning from him at the same time, and they both develop the rings together. And it's all part of his trap to ultimately enslave them. Here, Anatar, he's mostly irrelevant. Celebrimbor could have just told him yeah, thanks bro, I got it, you can go home. This is all just one big fat retcon though from season 1. My theory is Amazon didn't have the rights for Anatar in the first season. Remember, Amazon only owns the rights for Lord of the Rings and the Appendices and The Hobbit. Sauron's identity as Anatar was only in the Silmarillion, which they don't have the rights to. My suspicion is they probably went back to the Tolkien estate and they asked for permission for this character. The result is a blatant attempt to shoehorn back in this plot line, even if it doesn't make sense logically or based on character motivations. But what about those pesky elvish rings? Right now, they're being rushed to Lindon by Elrond, with Galadriel trying to steal them. Keep in mind, Lindon is like a continent away. Did Galadriel just follow him for hundreds of miles yelling, "No, Elrond, gimme"? Yeah, I don't know. Yet Elrond makes it back and King Gil-galad shames Galadriel into revealing Sauron's identity. Why was she hiding it in the first place? I don't know. It goes against literally every motivation she had last season. Her entire life goal was finding Sauron and convincing the world Sauron's still a threat. So it makes no sense she would hide this. And being embarrassed, which is their only justification for her doing this, that's a pretty thin reason to throw that all away. Gil-galad's reaction is pretty priceless though, because he pretty much just sighs and rolls his eyes and looks over it. Elrond responds by saying Sauron may have corrupted the rings, and
No, he's got a point.
in fact, Elrond's going to end up being the only one sensible person in this entire show. And actor Robert Aramayo, something like that, whatever his name is, he is caring hard. Elrond is right. Why risk it? Just destroy these rings, go back to Celebrimbor, and have him forge new rings. That's easy. He already knows how to make them. You could also at the same time warn Celebrimbor about Halbrand. Problem solved. Gil-galad, he doesn't really think of this and says, no, I want to use these specific rings. So Elrond goes, okay, and jumps off a cliff. Lucky for him, elves, they're apparently completely immune to fall damage. And everyone just assumes he's alive and he's run off. This insubordination never comes back to him either. In fact, next time he sees his king, he's given a promotion. Talk about failing upwards. Galadriel also faces no repercussions. Not for, letting Sauron just meander out of Eregion, and not for telling Celebrimbor about nothing. In fact, now that I think about it, in this show, everything bad that happens in Lord of the Rings, it's all sort of Galadriel's fault. None of this would have happened if she just went back to Valinor. Sauron maybe would have just been still floating in the ocean, living his hot boy summer. Elrond runs back to Círdan, who's considered the oldest and wisest of the elves, who also happens to be a complete giant idiot. Now, you'll have no shortage of that character type in this season. He tells Elrond that they have no choice but to use these rings. And I can only say, why? I mean, you have so many other choices. Celebrimbor can and does. He's currently doing it. He's making more rings. It's not like the elves will be forced to return to the Undying Lands tomorrow. You know how I know? Because they are still in the process of leaving Middle-earth in the events of Return of the King. That's like 3,000, 5,000 years later. The elves decide, hey, maybe we'll just fall into a trap. Who cares? And use the rings to heal their tree. In the process, one bounces down the steps to Galadriel, who I guess gets to keep it now, despite all her peers hating her, trying to banish her, and literally being the worst possible candidate. But the ring chose her. I mean, it's gotta have a will of its own, like the One Ring in the movie. Except the One Ring had a will of its own because it literally was an extension of Sauron, like we said before. Why would this ring have that? Why would it be able to make any kind of sentient choice? Gil-galad finally decides that he's going to send 2 messengers to Celebrimbor to let him know that Halbrand is Sauron. Círdan tries to convince Elrond how great the rings are by dominating the minds of some fish. And yeah, I'm sure that's going to make him seem less sketchy. He then gives terrible advice that just because the rings are maybe evil doesn't mean they should fear using evil for good. Oh my god, that is literally the antithesis of the entire story.
Don't tempt me, Frodo. Understand, Frodo. I would use this ring from a desire to do good, but through me, it would wield a power too great and terrible to imagine.
The story of Lord of the Rings is about the rejection of evil, choosing to cast evil into the fire rather than embrace it in the name of good. It's not that subtle of a message. I'm not sure how the writers missed the basic moral of the story. Evil begets evil. It's right there. Anyways, what's going on with the hobbits and the wizards? I'm sure nobody was asking. This subplot, it's still out of gas and trying to coast on the fumes of the mystery of Gandalf's identity, something everyone already sort of figured out 5 minutes into season 1. This season, they get to spend the entire time kind of just wandering around a desert looking for a stick. So, exciting stuff. Is that better than last season, with his arc being literally just walking from point A to point B? You tell me. Now this stick, it's called a Gand, and the hobbits start to call this stranger Grandelf. Grandelf? Now, who could this person possibly be? This is the greatest mystery of our day. They're all starving in the middle of the desert, despite Nori literally wearing food in her hair when Nori's friend shows up and they hide from the Southerners under a blanket. Hey, that's like the movie. Get used to that. This season is constantly calling back to Peter Jackson's films. This is despite Rings of Power being a completely different franchise owned by a different company. It really still wants to pretend that it's a prequel to those movies, even though it really is hurting itself by trying to stand up to them. The hobbits are then accidentally sucked into a tornado and blasted off by Gandalf, so I guess good, maybe we can get back to the actual story now. Back in Moria, Prince Durin is now disowned and living like a rich kid cut off from the trust fund. An earthquake causes parts of Moria to collapse, cutting off all light. The dwarves then have to face famine due to having no light for their crops. Worse yet, these dwarves, famed for their skills in mining, apparently can't figure out which direction the sun used to come in from. This is the entire season arc, by the way. I think the show kind of forgot that Khazad-dûm is a kingdom. It's massive.
Rightly done. It's a 4-day journey to the other side. Let us hope that our presence may go unnoticed.
You're telling me that every sun shaft, every single one in this massive kingdom collapsed. In Lindell, Galadriel has a vision of Celebrimbor. She tells Gil-galad that Sauron has returned to Eregion and is planning to enslave all of Middle-earth with rings instead of armies. Apparently, one of the powers of the rings is the ability to see Sauron's vague and ill-defined plans. Gil-galad says his spies saw Sauron return to Mordor, and they must prepare for his armies. But what spies? You didn't even know Halbrand was even Sauron until he already left. Did you have people trailing Halbrand just for absolutely no reason? And also, or more importantly, what army? He was wandering around just like this aimless drifter. Regardless, Gil-galad sends her and Elrond to Eregion to warn Celebrimbor. And with that, they ride off for Eregion. Wait, no, sorry. Did I say ride? No, I mean walk. They rode from Eregion, but they choose to walk back to Eregion on this urgent business. I'm starting to think that the elves going extinct in Middle-earth, that may just be Darwinism at work. Maybe. While out, they find the messengers from Gil-galad and that they've been killed by the Burrowites, but Elrond defeats them with the power of lore. Now, had Elrond actually been good at lore, he would have known that the Burrowites didn't exist yet because their origin is tied to the Witch King. So, riddle me that, Elrond. But you know what should exist? That like and subscribe button down below.
Share the load, the load. Get away!
And hey, what about Numenor? Remember it? Big island full of racists? Well, if you don't remember it, don't worry. Neither did the writers because it took them about 3 episodes to get back to it. The king has died off screen, and the fickle Numenorians, despite, loudly cheering on their queen as she rode off to help the Southlands, now they're very angry about it. This allows Ar-Pharazôn to discreetly plan to usurp the throne by discussing it as loudly as he can in the middle of a bar. At the queen's coronation, he stands up and reveals the queen has been using the Palantir. Now, in the books, the Palantir are basically Middle-earth telephones. There's nothing really all that menacing about them, except for when they start going missing and people start to suspect that people are listening into conversations or influencing people through them. Here at the show, it's making them more of a dark power, which is fine. It is mostly serving as just, this device to turn the racist population against the queen. And to seal the deal of Ar-Pharazôn taking over, an eagle arrives and he tries to claim that the eagles are here to bless his claim to the throne. I think the writers forgot that the eagles in Tolkien's lore can talk. That eagle should have just said, no, I was blessing her. I'm here for her. But the eagle doesn't. So Ar-Pharazôn is elected king to the tune of Game of Thrones. I'm not even kidding. The score is actually kind of similar. And don't get me wrong, the Numenor subplot, it is trying to just rip off the political thriller elements that were found in Game of Thrones, complete with their own even discount Joffrey. The problem here is that Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings, they're very, very different, where Game of Thrones is more rooted in politics and kind of drawing from the real-life War of the Roses, while Lord of the Rings, meanwhile, is more inspired by sweeping romantic old epics, such as Beowulf, combined with maybe Anglo-Saxon Arthurian myth and a dash of Catholicism. So when we go to Numenor, it does kind of feel like we've jumped to a different show, because we kind of have. But back with the dwarves, it is revealed that they only have about 3 months of food left. This allows Sauron to invite Prince Durin to Eregion and tempt him with the rings, despite, no one, not even the audience, understanding how this will help in any way. Sauron says they will heal the mountain, but they don't. Not really. I mean, anyone with a pickaxe could have figured out that the sun, it's up. You're underground, the sun is up. It's not like King Durin later makes this mind-blowing discovery. During all this, Sauron's obviously, manipulating everyone. He uses this cartoonish, high-pitched lying voice like, oh, Elrond said you're the wisest of the dwarves. So Durin, he just instantly distrusts him. So, well played, Sauron, master deceiver. On another note, though, Elrond saying that Durin is the wisest of the dwarves, that actually does sound like something Elrond would say in this show, because he is actually really nice. But I guess Durin disagrees with me. So anyways, he goes back to his father, who agrees to send more mithril to the elves to make more rings. Sauron then takes Celebrimbor aside and tells him Gil-galad ordered no more forging of rings. Now, why lie about this? How does this help Sauron? What if Celebrimbor just takes that as an order and goes, okay, no more rings? This relies entirely on Celebrimbor doing the wrong thing for no reason. It makes no sense. Celebrimbor, though, he decides to trust this sketchy stranger over his own king and sends a letter saying he's closed down his forge. Now, why would Celebrimbor bother to lie about this? As far as he knows, Gil-galad has no idea Sauron is there, and he has no idea that Celebrimbor is making more rings. All he's going to possibly do is make him suspicious as to why he's closing down this forge. Meanwhile, Galadriel and Elrond, they run into some of Adar's orcs. Galadriel gives Elrond her ring and then challenges the orcs, telling them to go back to the shadow.
Go back to the shadow!
Despite her gusto, she's captured by Adar. By the way, this was the episode where I finally realized that Adar was actually played by a new actor this season. So that's either some great work by the makeup department, or it really shows how much I didn't care about this character to begin with. King Durin receives his rings, and it instantly turns him evil. Which begs the question, if individual rings are already evil, just all on their own, why do you need to make the one ring to begin with? In the original story, the point of the one ring is that Sauron could use it to enslave or corrupt the others.
One ring to rule them all, and in the darkness bind them.
The them being the other rings. If they are already an evil, corrupting force all on their own without the one, what's the point? You don't need the one. It makes it more of a liability than anything else. You may be wondering right now, what great power do these rings give to King Durin? Well, it shows where he can dig just 4 inches into a wall to get to sunlight. Now, this may be less of an endorsement of the ring and more a condemnation of their mining skills. I am so confused by this subplot. It's sunlight. Just, you don't remember where the sun used to come in? Just go towards it again. You built them once. You can't build them again? I don't get it. The rings, they have this slight side effect of making the king overtax his citizens, and he becomes obsessed with it and panics when he loses it. Say it with me. Like the movie. The thing that really disappoints me here is the dwarf subplot was actually the best part of the last season. But here, I'd say it's easily the most sloppy. Back in Eregion, Annatar continues to be kind of incompetent at manipulating people. He tries to get Celebrimbor to make 9 more rings for men, but when he does so, even someone as dense as Celebrimbor stops and says, "Hey, wait a minute. You're trying to manipulate me, aren't you?" He refuses to make the rings at first, and Sauron says if he doesn't make them, he's just going to make them himself. But if Sauron doesn't need Celebrimbor to make the rings, why is he there to begin with? Just set up a forge in Mount Doom and make some rings. We know he can. It's literally the first shot of the movie. Again, the big problem with this version of the story is that neither Celebrimbor nor Sauron, they don't really need each other's help. And this is all because of the plot hole of making the 3 rings first. In the original story, the elves have to be involved because Sauron needs them to buy into his trick and accept the rings willingly. In this version of the story, he's not giving them to elves. So, there's no reason he doesn't just make them himself and pass them out to all the other races. And the implication here is that he clearly can and he knows how to make them himself. What does he need to do any of this for? Why is he even there? Later, an elf puts on one of the 9 rings and says she saw a demon, as Prince Durin arrives and claims the rings, they've driven his dad mad. My dad's gone crazy, man. So the rings are acting pretty evil, and Celebrimbor is just kind of a little perturbed and wonders, weird. I did the last 3 perfectly. Now what could have possibly changed? Gee, could it be the sketchy shapeshifter that, everyone warned you not to trust? Luckily, the writers didn't brush this one off. He does confront Sauron on if he tampered with the rings, but Sauron denies it and says this was all caused by Celebrimbor's dishonesty with his king, and it's that dishonesty that corrupted the rings. So naturally, to address this issue, Celebrimbor continues to lie to his king and changes nothing. Now, I know that Sauron's lying, but why does Celebrimbor continue to do the thing that he thinks corrupted the last batch? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Even Durin outright tells Celebrimbor, yeah, it's definitely that Annatar guy. He's doing it. The least you could do, Celebrimbor, is recall the defective product before you get sued. But he doesn't. Again, if Celebrimbor believes the rings are compromised, take them back to the forge, melt them down, and make some new ones. You are immortal. Who cares if it takes you more than 1 try? You got time. Also, how does this specific lie help Sauron? What happens if Celebrimbor decides to write a letter to Gil-galad confessing that he didn't shut his forge down? And then what if Gil-galad says, well, that's suspicious, why did you shut your forge down? And decides to investigate? None of it makes sense. It's all reliant on everyone doing the wrong thing. Celebrimbor, he's finally convinced that it's all his fault, but he tells his junior smith it's all their fault. And then Sauron covers by coming in and telling the smith, no, it's all Celebrimbor's fault. It's like a merry-go-round of gullibility. Sauron is playing good cop, bad cop, and he tells him Celebrimbor is just going nuts, and he woos one by saying, hey, you kind of look like my ex, something I hear all girls like to hear. They all believe this stranger they've known for maybe a couple weeks over the man they've known for hundreds and possibly thousands of years. Even better, they even hand the keys to the city over to him. Is no one in this entire city of immortals a little suspicious that everything went wrong when he showed up? I mean, the people of Rohan got suspicious. They knew pretty much instantly that Wormtongue was probably behind their king going absolutely crazy. They knew that from the start, but these elves, they can't figure that out. I won't lie though, there is some of Celebrimbor and Sauron's dynamic that I did enjoy. I said I didn't think Charlie Vickers had the right aura for Sauron last season, and I still believe that. I don't think he really has that graceful menace. But I do think that the actor is charismatic, and I like the idea that Sauron is respecting Celebrimbor while also using him. These two actors, they're doing a lot to carry this season, because there's some actual interesting conflict here. The motivations, they may be completely nonsensical, but they're making the most out of what they got. This is also the only part of the story that's really kind of close in any form to what Tolkien wrote. It's still very, very heavily altered, but the most interesting stuff coming from Tolkien, is this a shock to anyone? Maybe you should have bought the right rights and stuck to the actual script. In Numenor, Ar-Pharazôn continues to be a mustache-twirling villain. He's a far cry from his book counterpart, who defeated Sauron, brought him to Numenor in chains, and then was consumed by his own fear of mortality and just death. In a politically just stupid and pointless move, he decides to send Joffrey to tear down an old Numenorian shrine to make way for an aqueduct. This causes Elindo to punch Joffrey in the throat. Now, he just punches him in the face, but Joffrey then stabs his buddy and, oh no, not him.
I don't even know who you are.
Joffrey then lies that Elindo tried to start an uprising, and Pharazôn decides that he's going to give him a trial by Kraken.
I demand a trial by Kraken.
Frankly, I'm still blaming the eagle for all of this happening. I still am. The queen takes Elindo's place and survives, so really, it kind of goes nowhere. If I'm seeming a little aloof in this review, just remember it is the storyteller's job to make me care. And so far, I really haven't been given a lot to care about. Oh yeah, and then there's Isildur. Isildur! Yeah, he's still in this season. I had to actually add this part back into the video because I actually completely forgot about everything he did in it. It's very disposable and forgettable. He survived the volcano and fought some mini Shelobs and met some Ents. Remember those? Those are from the movies. I hope you do. That's why they're there. He also bumps into Arondir, who's kind of bummed out because his girlfriend died off screen last season. Probably because she didn't want to come back to this dud. Them's the breaks. At least Isildur and him, they get to bond as they fight and barbecue up a penis worm together. Hey, that's from the movie. No, wait, no, that's from Peter Jackson's King Kong. They couldn't just steal from his Middle-earth movies? They had to steal from that one too?
This one we shall call supper.
I wouldn't eat the penis worm. I'm just saying that. I'm putting that out there. From here on out, you really don't have to worry about Isildur. Despite a good chunk of screen time, nothing really happens that much with him besides like falling in love with someone who's maybe gonna betray him or maybe not, and it's whatever. Sauron visits the dwarves and asks for more mithril in return for something precious.
My precious.
Precious?
When King Durin refuses, Sauron sees the Balrog in a nearby fire. Now, I have no idea what this is supposed to mean. Is he summoning it? Awakening it? Just noticing it? The actual answer is the visual effects artist spent a lot of time on this model, and by golly, are they going to use it. They're really going to make sure you get the most of that 4 seconds you see of the Balrog. At this point, Prince Durin demands that his dad removes the ring, and the king says, no, it's mine. It came to me, or something like that. Something close to it. Anyways, it's like the movie. Are you sick of this bit yet? I am. The king uses the ring to super punch his son. I guess that's one of its powers too. The problem with the rings in this series is they basically have whatever powers the writers want. And admittedly, the ring's powers in the books, they were also vague. All magic was. Yet their appeal was really clear. Preserve the realms of the elves, be a priceless treasure to the dwarves, and grant immortality to the mortals. It is clear why each race coveted them. Here, they can kind of do everything, but also sort of strangely, nothing. I will say again, the prince and the king, they have some great emotional moments, but everything in this season feels a little rushed between them. And King Durin, he's basically possessed the entire time, so it lacks the same strong emotional beats. Sauron, having failed to get more mithril, he returns to Eregion and instead uses his own blood disguised as mithril. Now this begs the question of how did Celebrimbor hammer this black goop into a metal ring? It's magic, I guess. We won't worry about it. Meanwhile, all of Eregion falls into a panic when they see an oncoming army. Celebrimbor, as this is all happening, becomes trapped in an illusion, oblivious to the battle taking place. Back at the Orc camp, Adar interrogates Galadriel and tells her about the magic murder helmet. He then reveals that he suspects that Halbrand is Sauron. Then why did you let him go in the first place? I mean, seems like you made a little bit more extra work for yourself. Galadriel confirms these suspicions, which just convince Adar to launch his attack. Once again, hats off to Our Lady in Light. She warns Adar this is what Sauron wants. But okay, how does she know that? At most, this battle could prevent Sauron's plan to make the rings. Again, I do not get what Sauron gains from having the orcs come in and destroy Eregion. Maybe he just wants to make it so Celebrimbor can't make more rings so he has control over all of them. But why would he care? He shouldn't care about that if he's going to use the rings to control people anyways. Let him make as many as he wants. Adar launches the attack anyways against the wishes of his orc henchman Glug-Glug, or something. I don't remember his name. Oh, and I forgot to mention that Glug-Glug, you know, the orc, he's fighting for the life of his little orc wife and little orc baby. Look, there is a reason Tolkien basically made orcs evil troll goblins who feel nothing and live to kill. It's something that Tolkien actually in his letters later on would struggle with as a Catholic. He didn't like the idea of an irredeemable race. But there's clear reasons why he ultimately did it. Orcs were the monsters under the bed, murderous creatures that felt nothing for you, and you didn't have to feel anything for them. To add little orc wives and babies make you question the morality and the black and white duality of this entire world. In the words of George R.R. Martin, it makes you wonder, did Aragorn mass murder a bunch of orc babies in their cribs after, the end of Return of the King? It doesn't leave you with the same warm, fuzzy feeling. This was also the reason for Peter Jackson making them corrupted elves that were kind of preserved and then birthed out of mud pits.
They were elves once.
But never matter, little things like that about huge, big morality questions of this world. The attack begins. Like last season, this is the high point. Amazon has endless money to dump into great big action set pieces. The action is fast-paced and fun, and at times even a little silly, like when a troll holds up a bunch of orcs as a shield. Yet these big moments, they are kind of interrupted by brief moments where you could see the seams of just the scale in general. Times where the battle devolves into about 15 or 20 people running into each other, or even stuntmen left without their sparring partner. Elrond goes to visit his dwarf buddy and tells him, "I need your axe."
And my axe.
Well, Celebrimbor, he manages to find out that he's in this illusion from a glitch in the Matrix. He breaks the window of his forge and sees the city under siege. This is one of the best scenes of the show, as he realizes that he's been had and sees his treasured forge in ruins and his city burning. And thankfully, he finally pieces it all together.
He is Sauron.
Oh man, I can't believe you figured it out.
Celebrimbor tries to warn the other elves that Annatar is Sauron, but no one believes him because they now think he's gone off the deep end. In this moment, Sauron manages to mind control Celebrimbor and forces him to throw an elf from the wall. Now let's pause here for a moment. Later, Sauron would also control a group of soldiers. And earlier in the show, he controls a giant fish and a warg. The premise that the writers are working towards is Sauron can control people or animals to a certain extent, and he can do this all on his own. The problem here is Sauron's power to enslave people in the books comes from using the One Ring to control the other rings. Here, he doesn't need the One Ring at all to control people, which again begs the question, why do you need the One Ring? Now in this case, I think I know where the writers are going with this. They are going to make the One Ring a conduit for him using the Rings of Power to enslave masses of people rather than individual holders. Kind of like how Círdan used it to control a bunch of fish. This is very different from the books. The question is, does it work? And I'm going to say it's too early to tell. Another big question is this true to Tolkien's original vision? And I would say absolutely not. And if they do end up doing this, it removes kind of the metaphorical elements, like people being enslaved by their greed. It's just not the same. Little random soldier Timmy didn't agree to have any rings. He didn't do anything wrong. Why is he getting enslaved? It's a little bit more, thematically muddy. Anyways, after Celebrimbor throws the girl off the wall, Sauron goes, "Finish the 9 and I'll spare your city." Except he says this while he's surrounded by elf soldiers. So, I can only imagine them all standing there looking at each other going like, what did he say? Did you guys hear that? Elrond and Gil-galad's army arrive, but when they see Galadriel has been captured, Elrond stops a full charge. I'm not really sure that's how it works. I'm pretty sure they would pile up like a Blues Brothers chase scene. Elrond instead goes in and he negotiates with Adar, who demands the ring so that he can combine it with the helmet, and then that will be able to really, like extra really kill Sauron. Now, I'm not sure how he knows this or how he thinks this works. As far as I know, he doesn't even know how the rings work or even what they are. So, anyways, what does he think Elrond's gonna do? Just stand by then as Adar sacks an entire Elvish city to get to Sauron? Here's a better idea. How about Elrond writes a letter and sends it into the city, alerting everyone that Sauron is in there, and proving Celebrimbor's story right. And then Adar can come in afterwards and say, hand over Sauron and we won't attack your city. Done deal. Everyone goes home. Nope. Instead, we have Elrond, who decides to have kissy time with his future mother-in-law. Remember how in the last video I said Celebrian should have been the main character? I think the writers kind of wish the same now.
Yes, I wish that.
I've heard some say that this was all just some ploy by Elrond to give her a means of escape. Okay, that is part of it, but you can tell me my eyes are lying to me, but you can't tell me my ears are lying to me. Okay, not with that triumphant, just over-the-top romantic score. I think the writers are trying to create some tacky tween love triangle between Elrond, Galadriel, and Sauron. Even the actors came out and said they basically hated this scene, while a writer, they came out and said Galadriel is in love with Sauron. Can we please not? Can we not? Elrond leaves the Fëa negotiations and then openly discusses his big super secret surprise battle plan while still in the enemy camp and surrounded by orc enemies. I really hope none of these orcs who used to be elves remember they're elvish.
They were elves once.
Later, Galadriel would use the brooch that Elrond slipped to her to escape. While all this is happening, Durin is giving this inspiring 5-minute long battle speech, only then to instantly turn his entire army around because his father is going nuts. You can't send maybe just 15 or like 20 men back? Nope. The whole battle is called off just to restrain one person. Because they don't show up, the elves lose, so womp womp. During this battle, Arondir, he's unfortunately, very sadly, stabbed to death, and Galadriel's ring is taken. Surely there's no coming back from that. We will all mourn you, Arondir. We will miss you. The word of the day last season was luck. The word of the day for this season is pure stupidity. Sauron has chained Celebrimbor to the forge, and for some reason he's still working on the rings. Stop! Just stop working! He tries to throw them into the fire, but that doesn't work, so then he cuts off his thumb to escape. Probably would have been easier if you just didn't finish the rings. Also, you're in a forge made to craft indestructible metal. There's no tool to break a chain. He finds Galadriel in the war-torn city and gives her the 9 rings before being recaptured by Sauron, where he's then tortured and killed. This is again one of the better scenes of the show. The actors are carrying this very weak script, and Celebrimbor dying as Sauron kind of sheds a tear, that did kind of get me. I mean, like, aw, he killed his buddy. This is a showing of good performance over lackluster material. Durin confronts his father, who breaks through a 1-foot wall to find the Balrog just kind of hanging out. I'd like to think the Balrog could have gotten through that, really thin wall if he wanted to. The king gives the prince his ring and then leaps out to save Asgard. No, sorry. I mean, that's not it. Wrong footage. Roll the right footage. What was he trying to accomplish here? Clearly he could have just run back into the cavern with his son. It's not like the Balrog was really, delayed by his actions. He just didn't even go after him. But anyways, I guess he's a big hero now. So, because he's dead. Back in Númenor, Ar-Pharazôn uses the Palantir despite hating elvish magic. And he finds out that Halbrand is Sauron. What?
Man! I can't believe you figured it out!
This makes him believe that Galadriel brought him there for some reason. He uses it as an excuse to purge the faithful from the island, and then tries to arrest literally half the nation in one night. It doesn't completely work because the queen gives Elendil Narsil in a scene almost identical to the one where Elrond gave Aragorn the sword in Return of the King. And jumping back to the Battle of Eregion, Galadriel, now with the 9 rings, escorts women and children from the city by way of a secret tunnel. Secret tunnel! They are caught, and the orcs say, "Give us one good reason to let you go." And Galadriel answers by saying, "I'll give you 9. As if they have any idea what that means. Adar captures her again, but instead of taking the 9, he gives her the Elvish ring. Glug-Glug the orc arrives and kills Adar for allowing too many orcs to die or something. It's not exactly clear why he flips sides. Sauron then arrives and reclaims his crown and rule over the orcs. Then Galadriel and Sauron get to have a big old sword fight, and Sauron stabs Galadriel with the crown. He then takes the 9 as Galadriel tells him to go F himself in PG.
Yourself.
She then jumps off a cliff just like Elrond, but fortunately, elves are immune to fall damage. Elrond finds Galadriel, who should look like a bug on pavement, but instead she's mostly fine and Elrond heals her. But then the worst thing possible in the entire show happens. Sauron kills Glug-Glug. No, I know, right? But there's good news. Arondir is alive. Yay! Don't ask how. He doesn't even seem injured as he jumps back up and into battle. A few dwarves show up and the elves manage to retreat to their future Rivendell and plan to make a counterattack, or maybe build a cool river city or something. Anyways, the end. Oh wait, no, there's still the plot with the Hobbit and the Wizard. Yeah, I bet you forgot about that. Gandalf gets to meet Tom Bombadil. However, fans of this jolly, merry fellow will probably be mostly disappointed that he's pretty dour through most of the show and kind of talks, I don't know, a little bit like Forrest Gump? Maybe that's just me.
You had one job.
Most of it exists to call back to the Lord of the Rings films, with lines such as, like, my old friend, that's what they'll call me. Gandalf then has a short confrontation with the Dark Wizard, who definitely isn't Saruman, despite the actor's, best impersonation of Christopher Lee. I'd say I'm just happy Gandalf finally got his name so we could end the most drawn-out and uninteresting mystery imaginable. But not really now, because now they're just going to do the same thing with this Saruman-like character. They're just going to drag it out for like 2 seasons, like, is this Saruman? Gandalf and the hobbits survive their meeting with the Dark Wizard, and they seem to go their separate ways, which again, good. Hopefully they both can walk right out of this Second Age show. I mean, they don't need to be here. Anyways, that's it, finally. Roll credits. So what is this? The tale of the Second Age is the tale of Sauron, but everything is kind of overwritten here. Let's look at the plan from the book first. Sauron was missing in action for over 1,000 years when he finally emerged from hiding as Annatar, using his skills as a Maiar to convince the elves to accept his help in forging rings that would preserve their kingdoms. Unfortunately, the rings were designed as a trap from the beginning to enslave the elves to Sauron's will. He hoped to make enough of them that he could enslave the entire elvish race, and then those that accepted or coveted power. He forged the first 16 and then returned to Mordor to forge his one. Unfortunately for him, Celebrimbor forged in secret the final 3 rings, and then granted them to the elvish lords. Through these rings, Sauron's entire plan was exposed, so instead he chose to invade and sack Eregion and steal back the 16, repurposing them for other schemes. Admittedly, it's simple, but it's effective, and everything doesn't have to be over-complex. You can easily get a great story out of that. So why did Season 2 get just overwritten? Again, it's partly because Amazon doesn't have the full rights for this show. And it's also partly because they were trying to reverse engineer the mistakes made in Season 1. So let's break down now Sauron's plan in this show.
But you're all gonna have to listen up.
Because this is where it gets complicated.
Sauron first tries to be a human prince to infiltrate Eregion. Then he goes to the orcs and convince Adar to invade Eregion based on flimsy evidence. Then he goes back to Eregion after being exposed as Sauron and hopes nobody has told anyone who he actually is. Then he tells the ruler of the city that he is a shapeshifter and hopes that Celebrimbor just still trusts him for some reason. He then tells Celebrimbor that his king said not to make any more rings, which isn't even true, and hopes that he just ignores the pointless lie. Then Sauron convinces him to make rings for other races, despite there being no practical value. Then he hopes everyone around Celebrimbor just buys into his lies that he's just going crazy. Then he tries to convince Celebrimbor that the rings, which were fine before he got there, are only evil now because he's lying to his king, and then hope that that doesn't make him want to come clean. When Adar's army that Sauron sent to the city arrives, he's gonna hope that they don't disrupt the forging of the rings or kill him, before they destroy the city. Then he's going to have to try and get Celebrimbor to finish the rings in the middle of the battle without becoming suspicious why the battle is even happening. Then he's going to hope that the orcs, who already hate him and have already tried to kill him once, instead betray their leader so they can work for him again. I'll give Sauron one thing, he's an optimistic guy. He later tells Galadriel, "You think I planned this all out?" And no one in their right mind would think someone would plan something out like this that relies on everyone working against their own best interests for absolutely no reason. The problem here is the show is trying to course correct from that bad first season. That is admirable, but it is too little too late. They disobeyed foundational rules discussed in the last video. They rejected strong world building in favor of bad foundations. It is hard in this genre to come back from that. You cannot retroactively world build. Sauron's plan in this version is like when you tell a lie and then overlook an important detail and then have to go back and tell a much more convoluted story to make up for that oversight. That is this entire season in a nutshell. This is where Season 2 fails. It is a perfect sequel to Season 1's failures. It failed to build a strong foundation and results to jumping through hoops and overwriting to make the narrative coherent in any form. And in my opinion, it just never is. But that's all I got. I'm still interested in continuing this series when we get Season 3, if or when it happens. I'm sure it will happen. Amazon's just going to keep throwing money at this thing, so it's coming whether we want it or not. I would also like to move on to what I consider to be Amazon's true failure in fantasy, which is the Wheel of Time. People also seem interested in these longer breakdowns, so please like and subscribe, and that would send me a sign that you would like to see more of this type of video. There will be more historical film flashbacks and modern movie analysis. Until then, as always, please keep those reels turning. Thank you.